Listening, fill in the blanks.
Let's start.
More recently, a combination of the collapse in the world market for coffee and cocoa and the drive to increase yields by producer countries has led to huge swaths of shade-grown coffee and cocoa being cleared to make way for a highly intensive monoculture pattern of production known as full sun. But this system not only reduces the diversity of flora and fauna, it also requires huge amounts of pesticides and fertilizers. In Côte d'Ivoire, which produces more than half the world's cocoa, more than a third of the crop is now grown in full sun conditions. Other conservationists, such as Stacy Philpott and colleagues, argue the case for shade coffee, but there are different types of shade growing. Those used by subsistence farmers are virtually identical to natural forest and have a corresponding diversity, while systems that use coffee plants as the understory and cacao or citrus trees as the overstory may be no more diverse than full sun farms. Certification procedures need to distinguish between the two, and Ms. Philpott argues that as long as the process is rigorous and offers financial gains to the producers, shade growing does benefit the environment.
The rougher the surface, the more likely it is that a tire will vibrate and create noise. Road builders usually eliminate bumps on freshly laid asphalt with heavy rollers, but Kuipers has developed a method of road building that he thinks can create the ultimate quiet road. His secret is a special mold 3 meters wide and 50 meters long. Hot asphalt, mixed with small stones, is spread into the mold by a rail-mounted machine which flattens the asphalt mix with a roller. When it sets, the 10 mm thick sheet has a surface smoother than anything that can be achieved by conventional methods.
It has also been emphasized that in order to learn science, people often have to change the way they think in ordinary situations. For example, in order to understand even simple concepts such as heat and temperature, ways of thinking of temperature as a measure of heat must be abandoned and a distinction between temperature and heat must be learned. These changes in ways of thinking are often referred to as conceptual changes. But how do conceptual changes happen? How do young people change their ways of thinking as they develop and as they learn in school?
They investigated the progress made by 12 to 15-year-old pupils in understanding the path of falling objects, a topic that usually involves conceptual difficulties. In order to create pairs of pupils with varying levels of dissimilarity in their initial conceptions, the pupils' predictions and explanations of the path of falling objects were assessed before they were engaged in pair work. The work sessions involved solving computer-presented problems, again about predicting and explaining the paths of falling objects. A post-test, given to individuals, assessed the progress made by pupils in their conceptions of what influenced the path of falling objects.
Urban parks and formal recreation grounds are valuable for some species, and many of them are increasingly managed with wildlife in mind. But in many places, their significance is eclipsed by the huge legacy of post-industrial land, demolished factories, waste tips, quarries, redundant railway yards and other so-called brownfield sites. In Merseyside, South Yorkshire and the West Midlands, much of this has been spectacularly colonized with birch and willow woodland, herb-rich grassland and shallow wetlands. As a consequence, there are songbirds and predators in abundance over these once industrial landscapes.
Those past collapses tended to follow somewhat similar courses, constituting variations on a theme. Writers find it tempting to draw analogies between the course of human societies and the course of individual human lives, to talk of a society's birth, growth, peak, old age, and eventual death. But that metaphor proves erroneous for many past societies. They declined rapidly after reaching peak numbers and power, and those rapid declines must have come as a surprise and shock to their citizens. Obviously, too, this trajectory is not one that all past societies followed unvaryingly to completion. Different societies collapsed to different degrees and in somewhat different ways, while many societies did not collapse at all. The source of the red is widely known. It is created by anthocyanins, water-soluble plant pigments reflecting the red to blue range of the visible spectrum. They belong to a class of sugar-based chemical compounds also known as flavonoids. What's puzzling is that anthocyanins are actually newly minted, made in the leaves at the same time as the tree is preparing to drop them. But it is hard to make sense of the manufacture of anthocyanins. Why should a tree bother making new chemicals in its leaves when it's already scrambling to withdraw and preserve the ones already there?
When the project first began, the researchers used handheld infrared thermometers to measure the temperature difference between leaves of different varieties of sunflowers in an experimental plot. Wind can affect leaf temperature, and the research team discovered that its initial approach did not cater for changes in wind speed, which could not be controlled as an experimental variable. The team, therefore, needed a technique to measure temperature continuously that would allow it to examine the effects of other variables such as humidity. They needed a robot. Questions like this illustrate why those famous collapses of past civilizations have taken on more meaning than just that of a romantic mystery. Perhaps there are some practical lessons that we could learn from all those past collapses, but there are also differences between the modern world and its problems, and those past societies and their problems. We shouldn't be so naive as to think that study of the past will yield simple solutions, directly transferable to our societies today. We differ from past societies in some respects that put us at lower risk than them. Some of those respects often mentioned include our powerful technology,